What's up, everybody? It's Drew Muzan. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Tapped In. We got another special guest with me today, my boy Danny Blue. What's up with you, bro?
Peace, King. How you doing?
How you doing? Good to see you.
It's been a minute, man. No, man.
It's been a minute. I know.
Facial hair. We both got facial hair, man.
I gotta get mine hair. I can't. I need some holy oil or something.
Listen, man. Rogaine.
Rogaine. Rogaine is the key.
Listen, Rogaine and black seed oil, man.
And
I couldn't grow nothing.
Rogaine on your face? You ain't break out of nothing?
No. I promise you. 2 times a day. I did it for like 2 months. Then once it started growing, I just let it. I told my barber, like, don't line it up, just let it grow. And boom. Shameless plug, man.
Alright. He said Rogaine though. So I'm just like, Rogaine? Like, alright, cool. But tell people a little bit about yourself, who you are, what are you doing?
I'm a young man from Baltimore, Maryland, now living in Charlotte. I like to say I'm a podcaster, but I consider myself a creative. Podcasting is just the medium that I use to share my perspectives on the world. Outside of that, I'm in business, work for a consulting company, have my own consulting company, so business and podcasting.
So what are some of the areas or fields that's Danny Blue is tapped into?
So probably the biggest is podcasting. I'm on my 3rd podcast right now. I have one show that I co-host called Living Single with Dan and Danny, and then another show that I host and produce myself called Trillionaires: A Race Ahead. So those probably the biggest things that get the majority of my time. I just started a brand called The Creators Clothing a few months ago, so I'm getting into the clothing, design, manufacturing game. And then my consulting company, I work with millennial entrepreneurs, helping them start their businesses.
All right, word.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you're trying to get tapped into? You say you named those stuff that you're tapped into. What's some of the fields that you're trying to get tapped into?
Honestly, man, my goals for next year, I want to write a book.
Okay.
So I want to write a children's book.
Okay.
So I like to do everything that I do kind of is tied into who I am as a person. So my podcasts are a direct reflection of my passions. Like, I'm very passionate about the Black community and inequality and exploring inequality. So that's like a passion project for me. But I've always worked with kids. So I want to have a children's book and eventually have that lead into setting the stages for my own nonprofit as well.
Okay.
So next year is I want to get the book published, and I also want to start getting into real estate too. So I want some properties, things like that.
So we gonna get a racial inequality book sometime soon?
Yeah. I mean, the race. I feel like for me to write that would be, I would probably need help.
Okay.
I would need help, man. I would need help because it's so research intensive, like you said, with publishing the notes and stuff. I started reading through those, and I was like, man, I don't even know if people would get this because it's so sporadic in how I speak. So maybe. Okay. Maybe. Yeah.
I need one. Course or something.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about the Living Single Dynamic podcast. I remember when it started. I don't remember the exact moment, like where I was at, but I remember, you guys started a couple of years ago, and you guys taking off and just had a live show. You won an award with that, right? Or did you just get selected for the live show?
Yeah, we just it was during this event called Pod Collection. So it was an event this young lady from Atlanta, she put on. And it was shows from all across the country. We got nominated. Shout out to our fans for nominating us, and then we got chose. And it was our first live show, packed the venue out. It was a real big eye opener for us because we had never thought that the show would get to that point. Like, it really started off as a joke, like, literally. As a, like, yo, we talk about girls and dates and in the group chat all the time. Like, we should just do that for a podcast. And people liked it. So we're on our 3rd season right now. 4th season will come out next year. So definitely hoping to continue to grow and build off that.
So, like, you said it was an eye opener. Did you always think it, of course you said you didn't think it was always going to be like that. But like, what has that taught you that, people like actually mess with us? Like,
bro, honestly, it was like this last 2 years with just me kind of getting into finding who I was and the things that I liked and the things that I'm passionate about. Found that usually people mess with or they are attracted to what is genuine. So since my platforms are a direct reflection of who I am, I feel like it's easy for people to follow and grasp it. So I think that's probably the biggest lesson is, all right, anything that I do, instead of just chasing money, I need to make sure that this ties to who I am because it'll make it easy for me to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the biggest thing.
Okay. Word. So with that, I wanted to ask you just also about the Creators Club you're wearing.
Yeah.
Creators Club now. So talk about starting the brand. Why'd you start the brand? Like, what's the purpose of it, end goal?
Yeah. So originally I had started an idea where I wanted to have us to have merch for the podcast, but I didn't want it to be so niche to our audience. So I wanted to say, I kind of looked at what can I kind of jump onto that was a trend that I could create something behind. And creativity is something I feel like is being championed right now. You're one, I'm one. I know a lot of people are starting to branch out now. I think I was listening to a podcast yesterday that said there's over like 500,000 podcasts that were active this year. So podcasting is still in its infancy and it's only going to continue to grow. It's going to be the new medium for media. So I thought, like, why not create a brand around people that are like me, getting into this creative game? Like, so I started the brand to really just be an empowerment. Like, I wear something that says just create. So when I go to work or if I go somewhere, I'm reminded, like, all right, I have something to do when I get home. Like, I can't just get home and watch TV or something. I need to work on
something.
Yeah.
Like, and you said 500,000, just like,
and that's only gonna grow.
Yeah, and like, does that discourage you at times? Like, I know, like you said with the you getting a live show, that's eye opener. Like, people really mess with us. But does that discourage you sometimes in trying to monetize that and try to get that to like a bigger place? Like, does that discourage you?
It doesn't, because I look at like Joe Budden is the one that got me interested in the podcast. So I was like, man, Joe can do this. I can do this. I feel like I can talk. And he's just now seeing the fruits of his labor 5 years after doing the show, not doing ads.
Oh, he did it about 5 years?
Yeah. The show, like, it originally started just SoundCloud only.
Wow.
And then it transitioned to SoundCloud and Apple. Then they went away from Apple to Spotify. And I think next year they'll probably move to just touring and maybe have their own platform because they got the audience now.
Yeah.
So they don't really need Spotify, in my opinion. But I think that podcasting, they'll figure out a way to monetize it the same way they do, I feel like, music with just streams, because ad dollars are like, nobody wants to go to a podcast and hear a commercial. Like, it just waters it down. So they're originally, I think, initially gonna have to figure out like how to monetize it outside of advertising. And that's what I'm just waiting for, because I don't want to put ads on it.
I heard do you listen to Earn Your Leisure? I heard that, like, on their 51st whatever episode they was talking about with what's Buddy's name, whatever the episode, 51st episode, they were talking about how 1,000 for every 1,000 listeners you get $20 or something like that. I forget what, I don't know. That's the first time I heard that. I'm like, oh, you get paid for listening now? I ain't know that. I didn't know where that was at.
I actually was doing, it's crazy you said that, I was doing sponsorship coordinating for this podcast called Minority Trailblazers, hosted by a friend of mine called Greg Hill. And he was real beneficial too, and just being a mentor to get me into podcasting too. And he was doing a tour, and we were sourcing corporate sponsors for him. And they had all the questions like, how many unique listeners do you get a month? Like, what's your NDQ? Or I was like, I don't really know all this stuff. But just seeing that's what companies are looking for. If you can have your listeners grow by X number of downloads a month, then you have a value add. Or the more niche your podcast is too, the more value you can add, even if you don't have a lot of listeners, because they're only spending 2% of the budget right now on podcasts. And that's only going to continue to grow.
It's crazy. So with that, I wanted to talk about the Trillionaires podcast. Now, like, this is like a basis to you guys. Before this podcast, like a little bit before it, I guess I could say I started getting really interested into, like Black America and stuff like that. But I grew up in a context where, you go to a church and a school where it's a Black church, but I don't know what side is left or right, but whatever's Republican. Is that right? Whatever side is Republican, you grew up in that context where you don't really hear a lot of stuff about the racial injustice. As far as I can remember, maybe somebody who used to go there can say, oh no, they did that. But as far as I can remember, I never really heard the type of conversations that are being brought up, about social justice and, racial inequality and stuff like that, and the things that you're talking about in that podcast. And one of the things that I was wanting to reinvent myself, like I have it on notebook right now, I said for the person I want to reinvent myself into was going to be somebody that cares more about seeing Black America rise or whatever like that, and caring more about and using my voice. Like I read a book this year that talked about some of the sufferings that racial inequality and stuff like that. And I'm just like, man, I'm gonna use my voice more and actually care more. Like I'm not saying that when I seen somebody die that it didn't strike a chord, but now listening to what you're talking about and adding the pieces and the connecting together, it's just like, yo, I see what's going on. Like I remember watching a talk about structural racism, and they were basically talking about how Trayvon Martin was a victim of structural racism in terms of his community and how it went from the community that he was in was like a suburban community, then got gentrified and then it became the hood, and then and it's just like he was a victim. I was like, bro, when I saw it I was like, are you serious? Like, you know what I'm saying? So I wanted to just talk about Trillionaires, talk about the purpose of it, and then did you ever like how has there always been an innate sense in you, like, I care about Black America, like I care about my identity as a Black man, like, or did that just come from somewhere?
So I'll start with that. So when I was a kid, like I always liked Black history. Like I remember probably the earliest book I remember reading, Arthur Ashe, Jackie Robinson, Martin Luther King. Like my friend Martin was one of my favorite movies. If y'all know that's the cartoon Martin Luther King movie, but it was one of my favorite movies as a kid. So I had always kind of been exposed to that. And then I remember one summer I went to my dad's house and he had a picture of Malcolm X. So I was like, why you got this Malcolm X picture? Like, he's supposed to be the bad guy. Like, Martin is a good guy. Because I'm a kid, that's what I'm thinking. So it's not until I got to Wingate really when I started to like read and explore more. And reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, I was like, yo, nah, like, I need to say something. I need to be a leader out here. So that was probably the biggest thing. Just starting in college, just exploring more about Black history, and I just kind of once you learn more, it's like you can't. It's impossible to go back. So what was the other question?
And the question was about Trillionaires, the start of it and the purpose of it.
Yeah, so Trillionaires was started to explore the racial wealth gap in America. So I'm looking at politics, racism, and economics, and how they all kind of intertwine to lead us to where now the average Black family only owns $10,000 in wealth, whereas the average white family is upwards of $170,000 in wealth. And that's based on different education levels. Like, it didn't matter. We just didn't have wealth as a people. And it also started from me doing research and realizing how much spending power we have. So the name Trillionaires actually comes from the amount of spending power that was within the Black community.
$1.5 trillion. You said something about it being $1.5 trillion. It's going to be $1.5 trillion annually in the next few years.
Yeah. And that's only going to continue to go up. And I'm like, why do we have all this spending power but yet so little wealth? Like, what's the hurdle? So I started the show to really just explore that, and not only within educating myself, but educating other people on it, because I feel like it's very important.